Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all today, and it's a lovely day out there, isn't it? A perfect day in Perth, again. Yesterday was pretty great. We went to lunch for Tiana's birthday and then went across to the beach, actually 2 beaches yesterday, because it was just such a lovely day. We had to go to 2 beaches. One wasn't enough. But great to see you all and all the lovely smiley faces. We have a few guests today, so welcome to Colin Cicero. Good to see you. How long has it been since you were last here? Quite a while. 6 years, wow. Okay, we've all aged in the last few years. 6 years. Amazing. Good to have you back. Tony Nankiville's here in the back, somewhere there. And Ruben Dark's with us as well. Good to have you. Marty, good to have you as well. And also Nilakshi from over in Melbourne. So great to have you all here. It's like we have a reunion for the young people today. So let's welcome them all and make sure we have fun talking to them and getting caught up with them today. How many of you have enjoyed the last few days of the holiday season? Has it been kind of relaxed, quiet, peaceful, family time? Absolutely. Absolutely. I was enjoying some family time recently, and on Christmas Day, my father-in-law said, "Who's speaking on Saturday?" And I looked at the schedule, it's Kerry Gubb speaking. Then I realized that Kerry Gubb is not in town. He's actually in America right now. So I figured, okay, there goes the relaxation, and back to work we go. But it's good to be here. Had a long, late night last night, working on the message for today, so I'm a bit tired. Hopefully I won't be the first one to fall asleep today, but if you fall asleep, it's understandable because we're all kind of tired. But today's message is entitled, Never Alone. Never Alone. And Isaiah 7:14 reads, "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. This past Wednesday, many of us here celebrated and worshiped together with Mount Pleasant Church of Christ in this same hall, and we celebrated Christmas together as one large family. We remembered specifically Christ being born here on earth to the Virgin Mary, and just how important that particular story and account is in our story of life. It was a wonderful service, very inspiring. We shared worship together. We had both churches participate in worship a little bit. We had a split sermon by myself and Pastor Bill from their church, which was quite lovely. And it was just an uplifting time focusing on Jesus Christ, our Lord and our Savior. And it's amazing to know that we're not the only ones that focus on and pray to and worship and love the same Christ Jesus. There's quite a few of us out there, although we do it in different ways. But it was a great time to fellowship together with other Christians. Psalms 133 verse 1 reads, "A song of ascents of David, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." And that was lived out on Wednesday with the Mount Pleasant Church of Christ, all celebrating the special account of Christ's birth here on earth. The incarnation, Emmanuel, God with us. This account, the special account of the virgin birth, of the wise men, of the star, the incarnation, that Christians refer to as Christmas, and we celebrate on the 25th of December in the greater community. Whatever you want to call it, it's hugely important to God's amazing plan. And without that part of the story, our salvation story would be incomplete. It's a real key portion of the entire plan. God became flesh for us, not just to save us, but to demonstrate how much he loves us. And he's willing to take on humanity himself and live just as we live, celebrate as we celebrate, suffer as we suffer, and face injustice just as we every day face injustice in this day and age. But to show us that he's fully with us, he took on humanity himself. We are never alone. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister that we all probably know his name, back in the 50s, and he was a civil rights leader in the US, one of the more peaceful civil rights leaders ahead in the US. And he said the following about Jesus. He said, "In his life, Christ is an example showing us how to live. In his death, he is a sacrifice satisfying for our sins. In his resurrection, a conqueror. In his ascension, a king. And in his intercession, a high priest. That's from Martin Luther King, who was a Baptist minister. But the example that leaders set often determines whether or not others will listen to them and whether others will follow them and go along with them. And there's no better example of leadership than God with us, Christ himself. Throughout the prophets and throughout the Gospels and epistles, we see how our triune God became one of us, in part to understand our suffering, and in part to provide comfort to us when we are in those times of suffering. I'll just share with you four brief quotes about leaders, and if you can take some time, just think about these four quotes from the perspective of Jesus Christ. How does Jesus Christ factor in? How do you think of him in relation to these four quotes? The first quote is by Albert Schweitzer, who actually lived from 1875 to 1965. He was a polymath, which I think is another big word. I had to Google what polymath was, but that's just pretty much a smart person. He's a theologian, he's an organist, a writer, humanitarian, a philosopher, and a physician. So he's a polymath, a really smart person, unlike some of us in this room, myself included. But he wrote, "The three most important ways to lead people are by example, example, and example." How does Christ factor into that particular quote, do you think? The second one is by Albert Einstein, another smart guy out there, who lived from 1879 to 1955, and he was a physicist, one of the subjects in school that made my brains hurt. Physics. He developed the theory of relativity, which is actually the foundation on which many other physical type things are laid upon. But he said that setting an example is not the main means of influencing others, it is the only means to influence others. That's by Albert Einstein. Paul Wellstone says this: "Never separate the life you live from the words you speak." He was an American academic, also an author and politician. How do you think Christ factors in or compares to that particular quote? Never separate the life you live from the words you speak. And last but not least, people may teach what they know, but they reproduce what they are. And that was by John C. Maxwell, who was an author, a speaker, and a pastor. So some interesting quotes that I think we can easily relate Christ's life and death and suffering to those particular quotes. A few years ago, a man by the name of Captain William Swenson was awarded with the Congressional Medal of Honor in the US for his actions on September 8th, 2009, not that long ago, about 10 years ago. On that particular day, a company of American and Afghan troops were in Afghanistan, making their way to a part of the country to provide some support and safety to some Afghan government leaders who were going to a village to visit with some elders. The column came under ambush, and they were surrounded on three sides by Afghan militants, and they took some heavy fire on that particular day. Among many other things, Captain Swenson was recognized for running into the live fire to save and rescue his comrades in that particular battle. One of the people that he rescued was a sergeant, and as he and his comrade were actually taking the sergeant back towards the medevac helicopter that landed, by sheer coincidence, one of the medics in the helicopter had a camera on his helmet, a little GoPro camera, little small square ones, and this camera captured the entire incident on film, which was recorded. It was quite interesting. But it shows Captain Swenson and his comrade bringing this wounded guy back to the helicopter, and this guy had got a gunshot wound to the neck, so he was in really serious condition. But they put him in the helicopter, and then what you see next is Captain Swenson leaning over and giving the guy a kiss on his head, and then turning back to the line of fire and going to save other people and come back. So that was his heroic effort that he did on that particular day that was recognized for him. But when you see things like this, you begin to wonder, where do people like this come from? What kind of action is this where people actually have that deep emotion and care and concern for others that they want to go back into the line of fire to save other people? What possessed Captain Swenson to do this? And what possessed him to actually go back into the bullets that were flying to look for more survivors or more dead comrades? And then you begin to wonder, why aren't there more people like this out there? And why don't I know more people like this in my community, in my school, in my work, or in my neighborhood? What's interesting is that in the military, we often give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others might gain. But when you look at the corporate world, you often find that we tend to give bonuses to people who sacrifice others so that they might gain. And that's kind of backwards. But when Captain Swenson was interviewed and asked, why would you do such a thing and why would you do that? Why would you go back into the line of fire to look for other survivors? He simply responded, they would have done the same thing for me, and that's why he went back in to look for others and help and save his comrades. As Christians, we have an amazing leader ourselves. His name is Jesus Christ. And just like those brave men and women in that company of soldiers, we have a great leader who's willing to go to battle for us as well and put his life on the line for us, and has done that. Colossians 1:18 reads, "And he is the head of the body, the church. He's the leader. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy." So Christ is our amazing leader. Our main passage for today is from Hebrews 2, and we'll go through verses 10 through 18. So Hebrews 2, 10 through 18. Verse 10 reads, "In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation, our salvation, perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them, or call us, brothers and sisters. He says, 'I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters in the assembly. I will sing your praises.' And in verse 13 again, 'I will put my trust in him.' And again he says, 'Here am I and the children God has given me.' Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held by slavery from the fear of death." That's you and I and the whole world. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abram's seeds and descendants. For this reason, he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. And verse 18, "Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted." And that's a little bit about the leader that we serve and that we follow. This passage points out a few things. One, that Jesus is the pioneer or the leader of our salvation. And he was made perfect through suffering so that he could fill that particular role for us perfectly. But what an example Christ set for us as our leader. He was willing to go through everything that we go through and everything that we faced so that he could be there for us, to the point of death on the cross, just to demonstrate the depth of God's love for us. But not only that, his example takes away any argument that Jesus just doesn't understand what we're going through, or the pains that we have, or the sufferings that we go through. Sometimes we think to ourselves, God can't really know what I'm going through right now, but the fact is that he does, because he's been there and done that, even to worse places than we have been or will go. Now, one commentary mentions that Jesus cannot lift us up to share in his glory unless he first stooped down to be our companion in the depths of our grief, which he has done going through death to the cross. And because he first loved us and proved to us by both his words and his example, we can in turn love him and follow him. 1 John 4 verse 19, 1 John 4:19 says, "We love because he first loved us." So by Jesus becoming human, he shows us compassion and shows that he understands and shows that we are never, ever alone. Hebrews 2 verse 17 reads, "For this reason, he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sin of the people." And Hebrews 4 verse 15 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin." So as we conclude this short message today, let's consider a few ideas from the passage that we read in Hebrews. Christ's humanity means that he understands both our joy and our suffering. And because he understands, we know that he stands with us, beside us, and is in us every single day that we live. He's there when we rejoice, and he's there when we weep. And we're never alone in our human experience because we have each other and we have Christ in us. One thing that we can figure out too is that when we show compassion to each other, we actually are acting as the hands and feet of Christ to another person as they are in their suffering or in their time of pain. And Christ, our leader, by coming down to be one of us, actually broke the power of death. By succumbing to the power of death and taking it to the grave with him, he allowed God to transform death to where it no longer has any power over any one of us in this room. One thing to keep in mind is that whenever you suffer or have a difficult time, you're never, ever alone. And Christ knows exactly what you're going through, no matter how bad it might seem or feel. He's only as close as your next breath, because he is the life that we have within us. Like Christ did, when you face challenges or situations that are difficult, I'd recommend that we consider accepting the challenge rather than fighting against it. Accept the challenge and allow God his space to transform the challenge into what he wants it to be. Not only is Christ the pioneer or the leader of our salvation, but he's also our comfort in times of need, in the midst of our suffering and in times of loss, because he has been there. And it was God's intent to lift us up and bring us into relationship with our triune God. But to do that, God's Son, Christ, had to become human, one of us, which we celebrated at Christmas time. And by becoming one of us, Christ also was equipped to break the power that death had on all people. I'll end with this in Hebrews chapter 4, Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 16. "Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet was without sin. Let us therefore, brethren, go boldly to the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of needs. May you have a pleasant day, a great week ahead, and remember that you are never alone. Thank you.